This is Tommy's Outdoors 135. Have you heard that after 6,000 years we have a bison back in the UK? Oh, I hear you say oh, it's a wrong bison. Well, yeah, it's a European bison, but the steppe bison is extinct. So I guess that's as good of a bison as we get. Obviously, I'm talking about the Wilder Blean project, a project that is a cooperation between Wildwood Trust and Kent Wildlife Trust. And that project received a lot of attention in magazines like National Geographic, but also in the mainstream media. And as always, when a project receives that much attention, there are very positive comments as well as a lot of criticism. So to get to the bottom of it, what it is, my guest today is Paul Whitfield. Paul is the Director General of Wildwood Trust, and we talk about the project, about its aims and goals, about the criticism, about the future of the project, as well as if we ever have an opportunity to hunt bison in the UK. If that sounds interesting, then you should definitely subscribe to my newsletter. The link is in the description of this show, or just go to newsletter.tommysoutdoors.com. Subscribe to the newsletter to always stay in touch with all the great stuff that we talk about here on the podcast. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let's talk about bison. Paul, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great.
Yeah, I was looking forward to this conversation. Listen, the most important thing, how is the released bison doing?
Absolutely fantastic. It's what's wonderful is we really expected them to have an impact on the environment, but we didn't think we would see anything for months. But they've been out for 2 months now, and you can already see the impact they're having on the woodland. It's absolutely amazing, and they're thriving out there, doing really well.
Right, it's good to hear you. It's good to hear that, and most of people, at least a substantial portion of people know what we are talking about. But for those who kind of know or maybe don't know at all, can you tell us about the project? How the project started? What was the origin of the project? How it came about? And while you answering that question, you can go as far as the Wildwood Trust and tell us, how Wildwood Trust came about and what you're doing. And so you can take it as big of a lead to that as you want, as you feel it's, appropriate to explain the project.
Sure. I mean, I'll put it all in a little bit of context. So I'm Director General at Wildwood Trust. Wildwood Trust is a conservation charity. Everything we do is about protecting, conserving, and rewilding British wildlife. So we don't do any tropical stuff. We don't do anything outside the UK. It's all about native species here. The charity was founded 20 years ago, and it was founded 20 years ago in a collaboration between Wildwood and Kent Wildlife Trust when we did the first UK beaver project in Kent at Ham Fen. And there was a little wildlife park here in Kent, and it was used to import the beavers for that project. And one of the trustees at Kent Wildlife Trust, a guy called Ken West, saw this site and thought it would make a fantastic charity. And so effectively he started the work on creating Wildwood Trust. So 20 years ago to now, and the Wilder Blean project, which is the bison introduction, it's another partnership between Kent Wildlife Trust and Wildwood Trust. So it's fantastic to have that long-term relationship with them. So what is the Wilder Blean project, the bison project? Really, it's part of it is a rewilding project, part of it is an experiment, but a huge part of it is a public engagement piece. So fundamentally, what we're trying to do is recreate a natural assemblage of herbivores in an English woodland. So in one area, a 200-hectare area of this woodland, we're going to have European bison, Exmoor ponies, and Iron Age pigs. So between the three of them, they'll be creating huge dynamic change within that environment, changing the habitats around them, acting as ecosystems engineers, and really making it a more biodiverse, rich, resilient habitat. In another sort of 200-hectare area of the project, we've got the Iron Age pigs, the Exmoor ponies, but also longhorn cattle. So in almost exactly the same habitat, we're looking at a different species and seen exactly what difference the bison compared to a longhorn cattle will have. And then there's another 100 hectares area which Kent Wildlife Trust will continue to coppice and manage with volunteers and staff as we've done for decades. And really looking over the next 10, 20, 30 years at what differences take place in those different areas. What species come back to the different areas, what diversity of habitat and vegetation there is, what diversity of plants there are, how much soil the carbon's holding. All this stuff we'll be monitoring in a huge amount of detail.
And so what is the total area? Over 100 hectares?
500 hectares.
500 hectares.
Yeah.
And but they're like fenced out, or they connected to other like open land?
Yeah. The area the bison are in has to be fenced off from the public. Under UK legislation, they're classed as dangerous wild animals. And so we cannot allow public access to where the bison are. But the other areas with the longhorn cattle and the pigs, there'll still be public access as there always has been. There's also a series of footpaths through the area, and the different areas of the bison habitat will be connected with a series of tunnels. So people will be able to go into the area, but they won't be able to go into the habitat the bison are actually in.
Yeah, I read about the bison-sized tunnels. It's like,
absolutely, it's very exciting. But like I say, another really important aspect of the project is, the whole point behind it really is this is an example of an innovative solution to the biodiversity and climate crisis. We need to tackle both those problems together. And this is a project whereby we're using native species and introduced species to make habitats more resilient to the changes in climate that we're already seeing. So the stormy weathers and the floods that we're getting, the long drought-filled summers, the diseases we're getting like ash dieback, all these problems that we've already encountering, having a more complex woodland makes it more resilient to those changes.
Yes. And tell me, like, what was the moment that you decided, well, not you, but you folks decided that this project is a go? What was the trigger? Because you're running like you said, both organizations are on for a number of years, and you have different animals there already, lynx, wolf, and etc. But what was the moment they said, like, yeah, you know what, this is what we're gonna do? And what were the circumstances that you decided to pull the trigger on the project?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic. I've been looking at a potential bison project in the Blean woodlands. So it's the Blean woodlands, which are directly on the border, the fence line of Wildwood Trust, which are owned by Kent Wildlife Trust. And I've wanted to have bison out in that woodland for 10 years. It's been a long-term ambition, but what really was the catalyst for the change was a new chief executive at Kent Wildlife Trust, Evan Bowen-Jones, and the two of us talking about what we could work on collaboratively. And we came up with a whole series of ideas, and bison was just one of the many ideas that we had. The more we talked about it, the more excited we got. And in order to sort of do some research, a group of us got a minibus over to the Netherlands, to the Maasthorst and Kransveld projects over there. And I can't remember how many, there must have been 10, 12 of us on this minibus, sort of headed across the channel pre-COVID, so about 3 years ago now. And I think the moment of change for, not for me, because I always thought it was a great idea, but for lots of other people, was standing in a field in Holland with a herd of about 23 European bison in front of us. No fence between us. They'd had a calf about 2 days earlier, and it was amazing. It really was. It was a really powerful experience. At one point, 4 of the male bison wandered sort of towards us, and the rangers we were with just said, "Oh, just back off slowly." So we backed off 10 meters, and they stopped, and they were grazing. And it was, we have to do this in England. We've got to give people this experience. And there were a few people on the bus on the way over to Holland who were a bit skeptical. Why are we talking about bison? Why? It doesn't seem like a good idea. It's very risky. And on the way back, everyone knew we had to do it. So I think that was the moment of change. And then we were looking for funding, and we were able to secure significant funds off the Players, the People's Postcode Lottery, and that really enabled us just to move ahead. So we were funded for the first 3 years in terms of sort of the key salaries for the Bison Rangers, the infrastructure, all the fencing, all the public engagement that needed to happen for that first period of time, and also to bring the bison in. So that's, it was a long-term ambition that was catalyzed, and then we were able to fund it. So we had that funding all through lockdown and COVID, so we could just get on with this job as much as we could. So yeah, it was a really interesting journey, really.
Fantastic. And listen, was there any legislation also, I presume, involved some sort of a permissions, some licenses, something like that?
Absolutely. And one of the problems we've got is that the current legislative system is not designed for projects like this. These are new ideas that haven't been done before, and there aren't the licenses in place for them, really. So at the moment, in order to hold a European bison, we've got to have either a zoo license, so the premises would need a zoo license, which is totally inappropriate for this project, or you need a Dangerous Wild Animals Act license. But that's designed for someone who's got a poisonous snake at home, or a large cat that lives in their garden. They're not designed for a 500-hectare project. You fill in the form. It's like, what's the address? How are you going to contain the animal? What's its cage and its dimensions, and things like this. So it's just not designed for this at all. But we've worked really well with the authorities, and we have all the licenses in place for it to work. The other side of things that's made things really quite complex is the transport of animals. So if you're transporting a farm animal from Europe to a farm in England, that's fine, it's straightforward. Even after Brexit, they put systems in place. Transporting a zoo animal to a zoo is quite complicated. Lots of challenges from Brexit, but actually transporting a semi-wild animal or a zoo animal into a rewilding project, there's no process. It just doesn't exist. There isn't an import and export license system that links up for that. So that's been massively, massively challenging.
Okay. I thought you were going to say that was like easier to do, but no, it was massively changed because there's no process. Like, how are you going to do that?
Absolutely. That no one's designed a process to make it happen. So we've got all the paperwork. So our bull is coming from Germany at the end of this month. So we've got all the German paperwork to export and all the UK paperwork to import, and they don't match up. Yeah. So we're working with everyone to make that work. It's very difficult. Huge amount of work involved.
Would you say that was the most difficult part of the project?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I heard similar stories about people who are reintroducing cheetahs, I think, and a similar story that till the last moment they were going somewhere and matching signatures and stuff like that. So
absolutely, it's a really complex system that doesn't really work.
Mm-hmm. But you had a bison already in Wildlife Trust before, right?
Yeah, we've got 2 male bison within the park. They are 2 male bison that are access to the breeding program. So they're just within our park as sort of part of our sort of education process. So people get to see them and learn about them. But they're not going out into this project. They've spent too long in sort of a captive situation where they're very used to being fed. And lots of people.
Okay. So they were not suitable for that.
Not suitable. So what we want are animals that have lived in a sort of a semi-wild, large area where they've had to forage for their own food. Once they're in the project, we are not planning to feed them at all. They will be living off what is growing in the woodlands.
Yeah, ideally.
And our bison are just very pampered, and they would just come looking for people to give them food.
Okay, gotcha. Not wild enough.
No,
not wild
absolutely.
at all. Listen, so what was this like one moment? I just want to know, like, what was this like one moment when you knew it's going to happen, and how did you feel? How did you feel then? It's like, I presume it was like you were massively excited about it.
I suppose. I mean, particularly with the complexities around importing. So the 3 bison that are out in the project at the moment, there's an older matriarch who came down from the Highland Wildlife Park up in Scotland, and 2 young females that came from Fota in Southern Ireland. And so the 3 of them were introduced to each other in this big corral system that we built. And then I suppose the day it was real was when we opened the gate and let them out into that first area of the Blean. And you're working with animals, you never know what's going to happen. And so we opened the gate. We had the world's photographers sort of on a platform watching and waiting. Oh God, what are they going to do? But the matriarch sort of walked out into the sunshine. This was 2 months ago. It was predicted to be the hottest day of the year. So we were doing this at 6:30 in the morning so it wasn't too hot. So she just walked out into the sunshine, sort of stood there, posed for the cameras. She turned around and sort of signaled to the two younger bison, and they followed her out, and they all stood around for a little while, and then just walked off into the woodland. And it was really emotional, actually. They're out, they're finally here, we've got them in, and they're out doing their thing. That was amazing.
I can imagine that, and I'm surprised that it was till the last moment. I thought you're gonna say something like, "Oh, when I had a signature on this paperwork," or like, but you didn't believe it's gonna happen until the actual bison walk out of the cage.
I knew it would happen. I just didn't know when, because obviously when we got awarded the funding, we were supposed to be going up to Scotland for a big gala dinner when David Attenborough was going to be there. We were going to give him the big check to make the project happen. So once we had the funding, we knew we would make it happen. But obviously that dinner was just at the start of COVID, and it got cancelled at the last minute. So it never happened. And so we had a video call where we were given the news. And so I knew it would happen then, but I didn't really believe it till the bison were in, socialized, and then out.
Yes, good. They're good. They're out. Listen, Paul. What is the project like? Ultimate aim. I know that you said that it is an experiment, and we're gonna see how they're managing a woodland, and there are potential benefits, including engagement with public. But what would be like the ultimate aim of the project? Like maybe even like a success criteria where you said like, oh, that experiment is like fully successful. And I'm saying, not necessarily 10 or 30 years from now, but maybe 50 years from now. It's just curious, like what is in your head as the ultimate holy grail of that project?
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose there's two. The short-term real ambition of the project was to show it can be done, to show that it works, and to inspire other people to do it. And because, 500 hectares, that's lovely. But in order to make this work, to make it actually have an impact, we need lots of these projects. We need much bigger areas. So at the moment, I'm talking to 5 other organizations that are potentially looking at doing these sorts of projects in the future. So that to me is a huge tick. We've shown we can do it, starting to show it works. There's lots more data to be got from that, but starting to show it works, but also inspiring other people to do it and showing that, you can do it. I mean, people are saying, why hasn't anyone done it before? Well, it's because it's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly complicated and really expensive. To do it the first time and learn all the complexities and find the way around it. So that's the short-term ambition, and I think we've done a fantastic job with that. The engagement the project has, phenomenal. It's absolutely amazing. But the long-term vision, the long-term, sort of dream of this is actually within Kent. There's the Blean woodlands. It's one of the biggest areas of ancient woodland in the UK. And if you look on a map where you see Canterbury, there is actually fragmented in a huge arc, sort of from the east all the way around the north to the west, little bits of this woodland. The ultimate aim is to connect all that forest, all that woodland with connected habitat, and have effectively a huge area of regenerated sort of woodland and natural spaces where there are all the missing native species back in it. Well, I say all of them, not all of them. We probably won't have bears and wolves in Kent, but bison and pine martens and red squirrels and all the species that we've lost. So I actually have a huge area all around Kent that's full of those species. And again, to duplicate that sort of thing across the country. Wildwood was created and named because what we want to do is recreate the Wildwood. If you go for a walk in the woods in the UK, you don't see any animals. There aren't any. You might see a grey squirrel, an invasive American species. We've killed almost all our animals. And what we need is those animals back, recreating the food webs and the ecosystems, processes that are just missing from our countryside. If we bring those back, it will make it richer. It will create space for other species, but also create a far more vibrant, engaging world for us to engage with, reconnect people with nature.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you a few questions that are kind of like a devil's advocate questions, really.
Mm,
One of them, I'm going to jump ahead of myself, but one of them will be like, but why? Why we need that?
yeah.
It's like the common argument is like, we kill those animals for a reason, right? Wolves are bad, and bears are, even worse, and like, why we need all those animals back? What's wrong about gray squirrel?
I mean, there's nothing wrong with the grey squirrel. It's not the native species in this country, and it carries just the example of the grey squirrel. It carries a virus that kills the red squirrels. It carries squirrel pox, and so the red squirrel population, just in the past 50 years, has completely declined because of an invasive species. They do a lot of damage to trees. They eat a lot of eggs as well. So they're not a particularly helpful species. The purpose behind this really is, the UK's biodiversity intactness is terrible. We've lost so many species. We've lost, and we're still losing them. Hedgehogs are in decline. If we don't do anything, we will have lost our turtle dove population completely within 10 years. So it's not just bad, it's terrible, and it's getting worse. If we don't reverse the loss of biodiversity and do things to bring it back, then in 20 years' time, it's going to be like a desert here. There won't be anything. And each species we lose, it's not just that species, it's connection with other species. You know, Animals don't live in isolation. They have really complex relationships. And certain species like the bison and the beaver, they have huge impacts on their environments that create niches and spaces for other species. There's recent research just come out of Poland showing that birds nesting in the woods where bison live have a better success rate with their eggs hatching because they use bison fur to line their nests, which gives it better insulation. Who knew that? Bison nibbling on bark creates little tiny bits of damage, which actually enable certain species of insects to thrive within the woodland, which if they're not there, they can't live. There's huge complexity in nature that we don't understand. And wherever man tries to manage nature, we do it in a very clean, very simplistic, very tidy way. And it's not what nature needs at all. We also don't understand what nature needs. For decades, people have managed an area like the Blean, so coppicing sweet chestnut, so it's at a right age where nightingales can nest in it. That's what nightingales need. That's what all the textbooks say. And you get an experiment like NEP, where they let their farm go completely wild in places, and they end up with these huge banks of sort of bramble-filled hedges. And guess what? They're absolutely full of nightingales. That's where they want to be, but we've tidied all that out of our countryside. They don't want to be in chestnut coppice. It's the last refuge they've been able to survive. It's not where they want to be at all. So we're creating these habitats thinking, oh, that's what they need, but it's not at all. Nature creates the processes for nature, and when we interfere, we tend to do it very simply and very often get it wrong.
Yeah, I was talking on a podcast with Paul Galbraith, and he wrote his book about the British birds, and there was exactly this argument that these animals are nesting, these birds are nesting in certain places because this is their last refuge. It's not
Absolutely.
optimal for them by any stretch of
No.
imagination. It's just this is where they stayed, and like, oh, I guess they need more of that.
Yeah.
So.
For example, the red squirrels at the moment are living in little pockets of really unfavourable conifer plantation up in Scotland and in Cumbria and places like that. That's not where they want to be. They want to be in the broadleaf woodlands full of acorns and hazelnuts, but they've been outcompeted there by the grey squirrels. That's their last refuge. It's not where they want to be at all.
Have no choice.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess we're going to come back later on into the biodiversity aspect of it. Tell us a little bit more about the bison. Like about the bison as an animal. It's a type of really wild cattle. So if you can just lay it out, for people to imagine the size of the animal, their role in the ecosystem, ideally what predator, that does it have natural predators ultimately, does it not, and all this stuff kind of from the biological
Sure.
perspective.
Yeah, so European bison, they're fascinating animals. They're large. They're Europe's largest land mammal. So a full-grown male will stand about eye to eye with me, about 6 foot tall, weigh about 800 kilos, and run about 30 kilometers an hour. So a very large, able to run very fast. They very rarely run. It's very unusual to see a bison running. They're actually very calm animals. It's very unusual for them to be aggressive unless you are threatening their young. So they're not an aggressive species at all. But males and females both have a really impressive set of horns, and they have an incredibly rough, thick coat. And the interesting thing about the coat is they shed that every winter. And so they spend a lot of time rubbing against trees to shed that coat. And actually, what's really interesting, it's one of the impacts they have on the environment, is as they rub against trees to shed their coat, the native trees, which evolved with large species like bison, so oak trees and birch trees, they aren't really affected by this. But the non-native conifer plantation that's out in the woodland here, they just rip the bark off those. So just by rubbing against the trees, they ring bark those trees and they die.
Oh.
So all through the Blean area, there's big areas of non-native conifer, sort of Corsican pine and things like that, really low-value trees that were planted in the 80s. But they will kill areas of those trees, create standing deadwood, which is absolutely amazing for insects and bats and birds, but also allow the light into the forest floor. Because obviously dense conifer plantation, there's no light at all. Nothing grows underneath. And in all those spaces, you'll get regrowth. So you'll get oak trees regrowing, shrubs, all sorts of things. So you'll get that natural regeneration of the forest. But again, in complex pockets throughout the woodland, rather than humans going in and clearing an area and letting everything regrow at the same height, and you end up with single-story conifer or single-story regrowth of birch, which is what we've got in the Blean here, where conifers have been cleared. You just get thousands and thousands of birch trees all growing at the same height at the same time. And again, there isn't that diversity or that...
You don't have these age classes of the trees.
Absolutely. And you can look across the Blean and you can see all the different areas that are being managed by people, each area at the same height of forest, the same species, monocultures. And that's the problem. So they'll mix all of that up in an incredibly sort of interesting way. But they also, particularly in winter, eat a lot of bark. So plants out there like the willow and the sweet chestnut, which there's a lot of in the woodland, they will eat the bark of those at certain times of the year. And again, that will kill the growth above them. But these are species that will naturally coppice from the base. So again, instead of sending humans in to do all the manual coppicing, the bison will do it in a complex way throughout the woodland as they browse and as they eat. They're also eating plants like the bracken, which is a huge problem whenever you clear areas. They're just eating it as it grows, which is fantastic. They're eating the brambles in places, and there's bits of rhododendron through the woods. And what's interesting, they don't seem to eat it, but they just trample it and kill it. So
yeah, whoa.
Doing a great job already. So in terms of the bison, they live in herds, in family herds. So at the moment, we've brought in, like I say, a matriarch and 2 young females. And the matriarch she's the boss of that herd. When we introduced them, the 2 young females, they'd never met her before. She spent about 2 hours just sort of bossing them around, sort of literally shoving them around the area with her horns, bullying them, making sure...
Establishing who's the boss.
Absolutely. But it only took about 2 hours. There wasn't overly aggressive. She didn't harm them, but they knew. And then within 3-4 hours, they were all eating the same branch effectively. And now they're a really close little group. And that's it. She's the boss. And when we introduce the male, she will still be the boss.
Yeah,
and
for sure.
As the young bison produce calves, again, they will stay very closely in that group, and they will learn from the older females. They will watch what they eat at different times of the year, and become a very close, happy unit within that area. And the bull sort of stay around the edges. And eventually, once we've got more bulls in the area, they will start to challenge each other for mating rights, really. So a really interesting dynamic, very much a sort of a herd animal. They will follow the matriarch round and effectively do what she does. But a very peaceful animal. A big part of what we want to do is like I say, give people that experience of being in the woods with a huge, potentially scary wild animal. See that it's safe, but teach them to respect the animal, to keep a safe distance, not to make loud noises. And that's a big part of the project, is giving people that excitement of being there, but also that respect. And as I say, in this country, we've lost that experience of being in nature with wild animals. Just doesn't exist. So we're trying to recreate that excitement and that respect and that connection.
Yeah. So you already outlined the next steps to have a male and then have a first offspring, and then kind of like a probably different age classes of these animals there, and then kind of like how many ultimately you would hope to have.
Well, in the current area we've got a license to hold 20 animals.
Oh, excellent.
So we can get a decent sized herd, but part of the whole project is really closely monitoring the impact they have on the environment, because clearly this isn't a fully open wild space where they can just explore wherever they want to. There's no predators in there, so it's not going to be naturally controlled as it would be in the wild. So there's going to have to be some level of human management of those numbers as they expand and as they grow. So all the animals within this project are all animals from the EEP, the European Endangered Species Programme. So the offspring from the project, we're hoping, will be going out to other projects in the future.
When you were setting out to do this project, to implement this project, you surely knew about they're going to have a lot of pushback. A lot of people will be having negative opinions, and you knew that for sure. You knew that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Did you? Maybe the question is, does the pushback you received is pretty much something you expected, or was it more, or was it less?
Actually, less. The vast majority of feedback we've had has been incredibly positive. People are really excited about the project. They're really enthusiastic about it, and they are very, really interested to see what happens. The international press we've had for the project has been mind-blowing. On the week the Bison went out, we had more than 1,000 separate news pieces about the project. It was on the front page of 3 of the UK broadsheet newspapers, which doesn't happen for conservation projects. It was huge news and almost completely positive, which is amazing. So the bits of pushback we've got are actually pretty small. One of the very common ones is, why are you using European bison? Why don't you just use cattle? And actually part of the project is we're doing that comparison. We think, and I personally think, the bison are going to have a huge impact compared to cattle. You can see that, you get these areas of really thick forest and they just walk through it. They just walk through at a normal pace. They just bulldoze their way straight through the middle of it without even blinking. I can't see the longhorn cattle doing the same thing. They'll have some similar impacts, but I think the bison will have a much bigger, faster impact, to be honest, on the woodland. So yeah, people are saying, why use bison? People have said European bison are not a native species. So
thank you. I was gonna actually ask you about that, because that's quite common. So can you clear that out? Like, were they ever roamed Britain or not? What's the situation?
There is no fossil evidence that we had European bison in the UK. That's not to say they were never here, but we haven't found the fossils. They might turn up at some point. But European bison, there's no fossil record of them ever having been in the UK. What we did have, though, was the steppe bison, and we had the auroch. So the steppe bison is a very similar species. The auroch was the huge wild cow that we used to have. Both of those species are now completely extinct. So we can't use those. Those are the animals that would have done the job of a European bison in the UK woodlands, but they've gone. So the European bison is the closest we have to those two species. But also genetically, the European bison has the genetics of both the steppe bison and the auroch. It's effectively a hybrid. So it's not a native species. but it's the closest we've got to the engineer species that we used to have that we can't bring back because they're extinct.
So the steppe, so like on the European continent, we had a steppe bison and European bison, and I presume the steppe bison was more westwards, and now and these are the ones that we have as fossil record in Britain.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, as you know, this is a similar situation like with wild boar in Ireland. There's like no fossil record, but there, like we're not looking for that fossil record particularly hard. That's a one thing, right? So it's like there's no fossil record because someone by accident found it. There's not like project to find it, and there, I always say like, why would let's approach it from the other perspective. Like, what would have to happen so they're not there?
Yes.
Right. Like, and very often if you do this like a logical thinking and looking at the habitat and looking at the other species distributions, like, well, there's no good reason why they wouldn't be there. It's just we don't have a fossil record. So it's kind of similar situation.
Yeah. And if you look at the habitat that they do well in across Europe, there's absolutely no reason why they wouldn't have been here. It's so the habitat in the Blean is almost exactly the same as the habitat at Maashorst in Holland, and they are thriving there. So it's the right habitat for them. And like I say, the key thing here is that they're doing a job as an ecosystem engineer. It's not so much the bison themselves; it's the impact they have on the environment just by being bison in that space. They're already creating dust baths, which create these fantastic sort of basking spots for reptiles. They just create these little spaces for other species to thrive in. It's amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So that's cleared out that situation. Probably the other common argument by the opponents is like, oh, it's a vanity project. It's just a zoo. Why are you doing this? Right? You heard that too as well. What would be your answer to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. The reality is Wildwood Trust operates 2 animal parks. We've got bison you can come and see. We've got wolves and bears and otters and all the UK species. You can come and see them within a zoo environment. That's what that is. This project isn't that at all. These bison are going to be out in a 200-hectare area. The purpose of the project is to enrich that environment, to make it wilder, to make it more biodiverse. Yes, there are going to be opportunities to see those bison. There'll be opportunities to go in and have guided tours of the bison, because we want to engage people with the bison. We want to excite people about the project, connect them with nature, and inspire them to do projects themselves. At the moment, if you read, about climate change and biodiversity, it's bad news. It's terrible. Everything's on fire. Everything's dying. Everything's going extinct. It's awful. And one of the problems with that is it disempowers people. It gives people a feeling of hopelessness and helplessness, and that they can't do anything, and that they won't do anything, and there's no point. A project like this exists to inspire people to do something, to make a change, even if it's a small one. If everyone starts making small changes, it will make a huge difference. Yeah, this is not a huge, geographically large project, but it will lead to lots and lots of other projects in the future. And that's exciting. It's good news. And that's what a lot of people need to hear at the minute.
Yeah, you guys like a trailblazers for that thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So no, it's not a vanity project at all. Most of the time, the bison are going to be out in the woodland doing their thing, and they won't be visible. You won't be able to see them. We built a big platform at Wildwood here in Kent where you can go up and you can look over a big area of the woodland. But that then stretches for another 2 kilometres into the distance. There's a watering hole there, and it will be one of the best spots to see the bison. These tunnels will be great spots to maybe see a bison, but most of the time, people aren't going to see the bison. They're going to be out doing their stuff. What hopefully people will see is the explosion of biodiversity, the birds, the insects, everything else thriving within that environment.
Yeah. Well, it's part of like if someone wants to be against something, they always find a reason, right? Oh, it's a zoo. No, you won't see the bison. Oh, what's the point? You won't see the bison, right? It's always you can find the argument against it. Listen, two things I just wanted to close off on the bison and biology of a bison. The European bison, this is a larger species than the American bison, the one we know from the YouTube videos, people getting lifted in the air and stuff like that, what's happening in the Yellowstone and so on. So this is I think one of the few animals where European variety is bigger actually than the American one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's not a huge difference, but the European ones are a little bit bigger. The American ones also tend to live in bigger herds. So you can get vast, vast herds of American bison. There's a guy who lives in Canada who has a herd of 7,000 American bison on a huge project in Canada. I think there's only 7,000 European bison in the entire world at the moment. I mean, actually, that's one of the really interesting things about the European bison is they went extinct in the wild at the end of the war. And every single European bison now has been bred from zoo animals. I think 16 founder animals are the parents of every single of those 7,000 European bison that we've got back now. So it's a real success story for captive breeding programs. But yeah, they're a little bit bigger than the American bison. It's really interesting because the theory was always that American bison lived in huge herds, lived on plains, ate grass. European bison lived in smaller herds, live in the woods, eat trees. As we know more, it's actually more complex than that. And actually, if you let American bison behave naturally, they browse a lot more than just grass. And they do eat bark and leaves and twigs. But the heavily managed artificial herds that are used for sort of food production just live on grass, because they don't have that important matriarch system where the matriarch's teaching the younger animals what they can eat. So they just eat grass. But where you let the natural herds develop, they seem to eat more browse. And again, with the European bison, the idea that they just live in forests, well, actually in Belaswilia in Poland, if they keep them in the forest all year round, they need to feed them in winter because there's not enough food for them. The ones that are thriving and don't need the supplemental feeding actually live in a mosaic habitat. So there is woodland, but there's also grassland and there's heath. There's a population living in salt marshes and dune systems and doing really well. So actually, it's this idea that we know where they live because that's where we found them isn't necessarily true. They can actually live in quite a wide area and can be quite adaptable to different foods and different habitats.
Yeah, this is like often people underestimate the importance of animal actually learning from each other.
Absolutely.
It's like, oh, they're all instinctively know, and like, no, they don't. They actually learn from the mothers and from the other animals in a herd. That's
and the importance of that family herd, I think, is really important. That's why, like I say, we've started with these 3 females. We're bringing a bull in that's a completely new bloodline in the UK, and so they will be breeding and creating a natural family herd within the project.
That's excellent. And you're envisaging providing them some sort of a supplemental feed?
No, we are hoping and we believe there's enough food within the environment that they will not need supplementary feeding. But we are monitoring their body condition on a very regular basis, and we will look at it throughout the winter. And if they need supplementary feeding, we will look at whether we should do that or not.
Yeah, I guess there's also winters are not that harsh in UK. I know, like in Poland, there's still like a supplemental feeding going on for
yeah, bison. Absolutely. We think there's enough food in terms of grasses and heathers and bark within the area that will keep them going through the winter. And actually, we think what they will do as they spend more time in the area is they will create a habitat that creates more food for them throughout the year.
Yes, because it's going to be more biodiverse and more plants will grow.
Absolutely, and they will clear areas of sort of dense forest where there's no undergrowth and create much more shrubs, much more grass. I mean, it's a totally different subject, but we've got European brown bears within our park, and there's an area where they have created a lawn. There was no grass really within their area, but every spring when they come out of hibernation, one of the first things they do is they eat grass. And so they have almost cultivated a big lawn area by their pond where they will eat that grass and keep it at the right level. And it's incredibly healthy and green. Literally on the other side of the path where we've got our wolves, and they're in exactly the same habitat, there is no grass at all.
Yeah.
Who knew that bears created lawns?
I would love to have a bear. Listen, will those bison ever roam free? I mean, 50 years, 60 years. Do you think it can happen?
If I'm being honest, probably not. Even that project in Canada I was talking about, and this is one of the things that does annoy me a little bit about some of the criticism, like, oh, it's fenced, so it's a zoo or it's a vanity project. That herd of 7,000 bison in Canada have a fence around their area. It's a 200,000 acre area, I believe, but there are fences, and there are fences to stop the bison going onto cattle grazing areas, to keep them away from roads and from railways. So I see bison in the UK probably always having to have a fence around them. But what I really want is for those fences to get bigger and the spaces inside to get bigger. So we end up with sort of a fence around a national park that has free roaming bison within it and cattle grids and things like that. That's what I would love to see. But realistically, no, I think we're always going to need a fence around our bison. But I want it to be a fence around a vast area.
Yeah, and this is this argument, right? I spoke about it many times, and it often comes up when you talk about hunting concessions in Africa. It's like, oh, it's a high fence. Yes, but you can walk 3 days and you don't even see the fence.
Absolutely.
So is it still fenced? Is it still high fence area? So it's kind of like it almost should be discussed in terms of the area available, of the habitat available, rather than whether there is a fence or not. Because
I completely agree. I mean, the reality is in England specifically, there is no real wild spaces left. We're having to create them, and so there are going to be compromises. And we've got to be honest and realistic about that. We've got to create it as wild and as large and as connected as we possibly can. But we also need to keep space for farming, for food production, for roads, for train lines. Whenever we're doing these species introductions, we've got to be realistic and truthful about those things. We've got to work with what exists and with people's concerns. But there is still space to do this on a really big scale.
Yeah, listen, I'm just gonna go there and ask straight away. Do you see, like, at some time, like, this big fenced area? Why we can't have a wolves and bears and the whole deal in a large fenced area? Would that happen? Would you think?
I hope so. I don't know about bears. For some reason, people are terrified of bears. It's a long time since we've had bears here. I mean, it's 1,000.
People are more terrified of wolves than bears, by the looks of it.
There's a cultural fear of the wolf.
Yeah.
But European grey wolves are not a problem for people. They don't attack people. They're a very nervous, shy animal. They are not aggressive at all. But there is a real cultural fear around the wolf that doesn't really exist for bears. Whereas actually, if you look at Europe, bears cause a lot more problems than wolves.
Oh, really? I didn't hear that.
More in terms of destruction of property than attacking.
Oh,
people.
Yes. Yeah. But yeah, you have a teddy bear, and like always, like a bear is this nice, cuddly, and wolf is always big bad wolf.
Absolutely.
It's like I said, it's cultural.
Yeah, that's going to take a lot of work. We should have, in my personal opinion, we should have wolves back in our countryside in this country. They have made their way across every country in Europe now. There are wolves living wild in every single country in Europe. They won't get here because of the channel, so we need to help them. But we're many, many years away from people being ready to accept that. But we need to work on it. We're still, lynx is a species that we haven't got, that people are talking about a reintroduction of at the early stages, and there's pushback and there's objection to that. There's no reason why we shouldn't have lynx. There's never been an attack by lynx on a human.
Yeah, like with lynx, it's just like when I follow these even the recent attempts, it's like at some point it goes like you're talking about 3 cats. And they have a GPS collars, and some people are up their arms. It's like, I just kudos to people who are not getting discouraged.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because part of me says like, oh God, is it even worth the effort for 3 spaniel-sized cats?
Yeah, and lynx are beautiful, but they're so secretive. You could be walking through a wood that had a population of lynx, and you would never see one.
I was talking with the scientist who was researching lynx for like 10 years, 15 years, and he's seen lynx once. And that was when he was driving with a family in his car, not even doing research. Like, oh, look at that, it's lynx.
Absolutely. But again, it's we've lost our predators completely in the UK. We're working on reintroductions, looking at pine martens and wildcat. So we've got a captive breeding program here, and we're looking at a wildcat reintroduction in the next few years, and hopefully that will pave some of the way for a lynx reintroduction. A lot of the stakeholder work is starting to happen slowly up in Scotland around lynx, and that's fantastic. We've got to work on this slowly, bring people along with us, and listen to people's concerns. You're talking about a wildcat reintroduction, and local farmers are worried. Are they going to eat my sheep? And one of the most effective things to do is to take a taxidermy cat with you and go, no, they're only this big.
Yeah.
It's the size of a large domestic cat. It's not going to eat sheep. It's not going to be a problem for farmers. But people need to know that. They need the information to make the decisions.
Yeah, we'll see. Hopefully we'll have a lynx. I was talking with a scientist who was talking about lynx. There is a small probability they might have some impact on sheep, but not like a massive. Listen, in that area where you have bisons, you have a deer there as well.
No, at the moment there aren't almost no deer in this area of Kent at all.
Is it on purpose, or is it just?
I think they just, where they have come back, they've been shot.
Okay.
So there are none in this area at all, but there are in other areas. Yeah.
Okay. So together, like in this large fenced area with bison, there's no deer in there.
No, there's no deer at all.
Okay. Listen, I need to ask this question. Do you see in the future, in a distant, again, I'm talking 50 years, maybe more. Do you see ever any limited hunting opportunities for bison?
I don't know about hunting. I can see in the future there being bison projects where the bison that are excess to the project because we don't have wolves or bears to predate them, I can see them going into food. Again, and going back to that Canadian project, the excess male bison from that population are put into the food chain. But that is free range, organic, carbon positive meat that is, I've not tried it, but it's supposed to be the best bison meat you can possibly buy. And I personally don't have a huge problem with that. You need to manage the population. We need to manage the population of deer that are out in the countryside, because if you have too many animals, they're damaging to the environment. And we don't have a balanced system where nature can just look after itself with predators. So I see that in the future, whether there be hunting or not, I really don't know.
We're going to be wrapping this thing up, so I'm just going to have a few more general questions, and one that I absolutely have to ask is about the term rewilding. We really talked about rewilding. We've really already used the word rewilding, but the amount of emotions it sparks when you mention rewilding. What's your, as a person who's at the forefront of it all, do you think that using the term rewilding came to the point that is not helpful? And we probably should talk about conservation, reintroduction, restorations, other R's, just not rewilding? Or you think that the term describes something so distinctively different than the other R's or conservation that it's necessary to use it?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, the Wilder Blean project, the bison introduction, we're calling that a wilding project. We're not calling it a rewilding project, because actually the reason for it is rewilding suggests you're trying to go back to something. You're going back to the Pleistocene or something like this. And the truth is, and the reality is we can't go back to anything. Things have changed fundamentally. So what we can do is we can reintroduce animals, we can put back processes that will make it wilder. And whether you call it rewilding or wilding or restoration conservation, personally, I don't care. I don't think it matters. I think so long as we are helping nature, we're restoring biodiversity, we're bringing species back, we're creating space and complexity for nature to thrive, I don't care what anyone calls it. It's something I don't have a lot of time for debates about. And you see it on social media. Oh, they call it a rewilding project, and it's not. I think it's a distraction. I don't think it matters. That's my personal opinion. But sometimes it is quite an important word. And it's interesting, Wildwood was always set up as a rewilding charity. We always wanted to rewild. We wanted to reintroduce, herbivores to recreate ecosystems processes. We want to reintroduce beavers to restore wetlands. That's sort of what we're all about. But we didn't use that word for the first 12 years of our existence because it was so controversial. It was a maverick term. You didn't want to be associated with it. So we're quite proud to be a conservation charity that promotes and actively does rewilding. I think it's important, and it's gained critical mass now. Finally, after being a dirty word and people not wanting to talk about it, people are excited about rewilding. So I think it's a word that galvanizes people in a way that conservation, restoration, and ecosystem services just doesn't. But it's one of those things. It can be very useful for PR. It gets people's attention, gets the negative attention as well.
Exactly. It can equally throw a spanner in the works. Like you said, you didn't even use that for the first number of years.
Absolutely. So it can create opposition. And that's where I think you just need to be very careful. So there are projects we're involved with where you could call it a rewilding project if you wanted to, but it's probably stretching a bit. But actually, we know in the area we're talking about it, people will have a negative association with that word, so we won't use the word. But we're doing the same work.
Yeah. That's very very good approach.
And I think the problem is people will associate rewilding with we're bringing back wolves and bears. And
yes, say rewilding. You say rewilding, I think wolf.
Absolutely. And the other side of that is people will criticize a project like this and say you can't call it rewilding because there aren't predators. It's not rewilding unless there are predators. And again, I don't think it really matters. If we could introduce predators, then great, but it wouldn't work in this. It's too small an area and people aren't ready for them. So we're doing everything we can where we can to make it as natural and wild as possible, but within the limitations that exist. And if we sit here and say, well, we're not going to do anything till we can create a complete ecosystem with predators, well, we're going to sit here doing nothing for another 50 years, and we don't have time for that.
And probably then you're going to do nothing at all because you're going to be too late.
If you wait till things are perfect, you won't do anything.
Yep.
We're doing everything we can now.
Absolutely. Paul, listen, how do you think what is the future of wildlife in Britain? Where is it? Are we really the best case scenario? Are these sort of fortress conservation projects, or do you think that at some point we could, get be more kind of living side by side of nature? And if yes, how that would look like? Or maybe, this fortress conservation in air quotes model is the best we can hope for, and just, like you said, we just need to make sure we have a very big fortress, so a lot of land.
Yeah, I mean, it's at the moment, I think we're really on the cusp at a tipping point where we could go either way. There's worrying noises from the new government that they're going to scale back stuff. If they go ahead with the idea to create the new funding system for farming, where farmers will actually get paid to restore nature rather than farming in an unproductive, unprofitable way, that could make the difference. And that's why so many people are so worried and so angry at the moment that it might disappear, because I think it's a once in a generation opportunity to fundamentally change the incentive system for farming so that high quality farming that's producing food efficiently, great. That's absolutely essential for the country. But there are so many unproductive farms where actually the only reason they exist is because of government bailouts, and they're producing very little poor quality food. It would be so much better if those spaces were incentivized to look after that land for nature. That would create space, that would create the opportunity, and that would create funding to make this happen on a huge scale. So
that's what happened on NEP, right? That it was a similar story, that the farming was just not viable financially.
Absolutely. And then there are many farms out there where it isn't, but because of the current subsidy system, they can carry on doing that. And they're incentivized to carry on doing that. But it's not really in anyone's best interest to do it in that way. So the new system, if they can get it right, it could unlock that, which is really exciting, but also very worrying because there are rumors that they aren't going to do it now. So we're really hanging in the balance at the moment. If that goes ahead, I'm quite optimistic that we can get this. What we need, what this country really needs, is lots and lots of small projects that connect together. That's what we need. Is at the moment our bits of nature are in isolated little pockets, which are heavily managed by people, and they're not in very good condition, and they're not connected to each other.
Yeah. This is this habitat connectivity, right? This is like a factor called habitat connectivity, which really tells you how healthy the ecosystem is.
Yeah, and in the UK, it's terrible. It's awful. So what we need is bigger, better, more wild spaces that are linked together. It's going to take a long time for that to be on a proper scale and to have a real critical mass of space and size. But I think there is a real possibility of that happening. And that could open it up beyond just these fortress systems that you were talking about, and actually have real wild spaces back in this country. We've got these national parks that are farmed to within an inch of their life and don't have very much biodiversity in them at all. That could change. There's a huge amount that needs to change. There's also cultural things that need to change, but it could happen. And yeah, I'm optimistic it will. At this point, I'm optimistic. I think the will of the people is there for it to happen. Finally, people are excited about this stuff and they want it to happen.
Good to hear that. What are the next big milestones for the Bison project, for the Wilder Bleen project?
This is the really exciting thing, is the 2 young female bison that we brought in from FOTA. The plan is really, once the bull arrives, that they may breed next year. We might have young bison. We got a surprise. Just a few weeks ago, one of those bison gave birth to a calf.
Wow.
This is the news that's currently been kept secret because it's a very young animal, and obviously young animal effectively in the wild, there's all sorts of risks. But at the moment, she's doing really well. We also don't want people going and trying to find her or see her. So we're delaying the news for a little while, but hoping to announce it in a couple of weeks, hopefully just before this podcast comes out. So we have we think she's a girl. So a new female bison that's been born in the project already, which is just incredibly exciting.
Very good.
She's
very
the first
good.
one born in the project, so she will never have an artificial diet. She won't have any of the sort of the drugs and the things that are normally given to captive bison. So a proper wild bison with a wild diet from the start.
So one of those female bison that you brought were pregnant.
Yeah.
Okay. Did you know about that?
No, it's a complete surprise.
Wow.
It's very hard to tell if a bison's pregnant unless you actually do an ultrasound scan on them. And obviously,
it wouldn't come up with in the blood work or anything.
No. No, so we had them fully health screened before they travelled, and it didn't show up. So yeah, it's a lovely surprise. So we've got 4 bison, not 3.
Oh wow! Okay, that's a good news. That's a good news.
And in terms of future milestones, yeah, absolutely. Once they start breeding out there and expanding, and we get the tunnels in place, and we can expand the area that they're in, it's really exciting to see. And the first scientific papers that'll be coming out looking at exactly the impact these animals are having. We've got huge amount of monitoring happening with the project. There's 5 different universities and the Natural History Museum involved in helping us monitor the project. So lots of research will be coming out of it.
Perfect. Paul, listen, that's a fantastic job you guys are doing. I'm wishing you all the best. Keep at it. And like you said, with a project like that, maybe the tide starts to turn. So we have a little bit more nature and a little bit more of a, diverse nature. And hopefully eventually that's going to start to spill out outside of the fenced areas, and even when you're walking on the fields, you will see some more animals Not necessarily wolves, although I wouldn't mind, to be honest.
We're still a very long way from wolves.
Yeah, I know.
It'd be lovely to
It's all because they can't swim that well, right?
Absolutely.
Paul, thanks a lot. Appreciate your time.
No problem at all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.